Hey, what's going on? What's happening, everybody? What's happening? What's happening? I hope everybody been doing well. All right. Shout out to the chat. What's up, Big Cree Money? I know you've been waiting for it. You was talking about it. You brought it to my attention. So finally, I got around to it. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, what's going on? This your girl Tiffany coming through here live in effect. And today's topic, I'm going to be talking about the domestic slave trade. So I'm gonna get into why it's important, but before I go there, please make sure you like and subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, share the channel, all that great stuff, and shout out to the new subscribers that's coming through. Shout out to the people that's been checking out my other videos and giving commentaries or whatnot. I appreciate that. And so thank you guys so much. But let me explain why I want to talk about the domestic slave trade. It's very important because a lot of us don't know about this. So only thing that we really hear about is the transatlantic slave trade, right? And also the aftermath of it when it became illegal. But many people don't know about the domestic slave trade that happened during the time, I think either before the Civil War or during the Civil War. There was trades going on mainly between the upper South and the deep South. Okay, so the upper South, for those of you that don't know what the upper South is, it will be like Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia area, up in those region. Okay, those region would be considered as upper South. All right, and then the deep South would be like Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, the North Carolina areas. Also, what else? Louisiana, Arkansas, Texas. That's the deep South. Okay. All right. And then, you got Kentucky that's part of the South, but it's considered to be mid Atlantic area. All right. So yeah, there was domestic slave trade going on between the upper South and the deep South. All right. A lot of people don't really know about that, and you're not gonna hear much about it. It's very surprising that it's not talked about as much, but yeah, these things that took place. So I have sources that I was able to gather, and also I have books. All right. So some of these books was written around 1836, and then there's one that was written in 1904, and then there's the one that recently came about in 2021. Okay, so I will get into all of that, but let's go ahead and get started with the information. All right, thank you for coming through. I appreciate it. All right, so let me go ahead and, of course, I always like recommend people to go to the Wikipedia source and try to see if you get any resources and information from there. All right, it's a lot easier. Um, so right here, now let's look at the sources real fast. I'm not gonna spend too much time on it because I want to get through all the other sources. But here it is. So here's the domestic slave trade, right? All right. It was known as the Second Middle Passage and the interregional slave trade. It was the term for the domestic trade of enslaved people within the United States that relocated slaves across states during the antebellum period, right? It was most significant after 1808 when the importation of slaves was prohibited. Historians estimate that 1 million slaves were taken in a forced migration from the upper South, primarily Maryland and Virginia, to the territories and then new states of the deep South: Georgia, Alabama, Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Texas. Okay. So it says economics say that transaction in the inter-regional slave market were driven primarily by differences in marginal productivity of labor, which were based on the relative advantage between climates for the production of staple goods. The trade was strongly influenced by the invention of the cotton gin, right, which was made short staple cotton profitable for cultivation across large swaths of the upland deep south, which is the Black Belt. Previously, the commodity was based on long staple cotton cultivated in coastal areas and the Sea Islands. So, for those of you that don't know the Sea Islands, right, that's primarily the area where the Gullah Geechee people is at. So, the Sea Islands, like right on the peninsula of South Carolina, all the way down to Florida. Okay, so you got St. Hilton Island, you got St. Simon Island, St. Sapio Island, Tybee Island. Those are considered as sea islands. All right. Um, Now let's see. Let's continue on. Right. The disparity in productivity created arbitrary opportunities for traders to exploit. Give me one moment. All right, then. So I'm sorry about that. Let me get back to what I was saying before. All right. Okay, yeah, the disparity in productivity create arbitrary opportunities for traders to exploit, and it facilitate regional specialization in labor production due to a lack of data, particularly with regard to slave price, land values, and export totals for slave. The true effects of the domestic slave trade on both the economy of the Old South and general migration patterns of slaves into Southwest territories remain uncertain. These have served as points of contention among economic historians. All right. So pretty much what we see here is that we will find out if those of us that has taken the DNA test, like if you looked at ancestry, it talk about the African descended people who were in like Virginia area, then they were sent over to Georgia or Florida and all these different places. Well, that was not only because of the fact that they migrated on their own, but they were also transported to those areas. Okay. So people can argue that a vast majority of our ancestors here in the United States, right, when they, as far as like being traded off is concerned, that most of them came about the Virginia, Maryland area. They can make that argument, most of them. But at the same time, because a lot of them was sent over to Virginia, Maryland, and South Carolina, those were like the main states that had a lot of slave practices going on, and they had a lot of, they had a lot of importation of slaves more than any other states in the South. Okay, all right. So let me see. Let's go down to So let's go down to where they talk about economics. So it says the internal slave trade among colonies emerged in 1660 as a source of labor in early America. It is estimated that between 1790 and 1860, approximately 835,000 slaves were relocated to American South. Right? Okay. So it says the bigger sources for the domestic slave trade were exporting states in the upper South, especially Virginia, Maryland, and to a lesser extent in Delaware, Kentucky, and North Carolina. Now, I'm kind of confused about Delaware because I'm not sure if it's really considered as the South or if it's just considered as the East Coast, but for the sake of the argument, I guess it's considered as the South. Anyway, it says Delaware, Kentucky, and North Carolina. From these states, most slaves were imported into the deep South, right? Again, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas. Right, so Robert Forgel and Stanley Eagleman attribute the larger portion of the slave migration due to planters who relocated their entire slave population to the deep south to develop new plantations or taking over existing ones. All right, so different things were taking place. Contributing factors: soil exhaustion and crops changes. So it says historian argues in favor of soil exhaustion as an explanation for slave importation into the Deep South, posit that exploring states emerged as slave producers because of the transformation of agriculture in the Upper South, right? So it says by the late 18th century, the coastal and Piedmont tobacco areas were being converted to mixed crop because of soil exhaustion and changing market. Then it goes down to talk about the land availability from Indian removal. So with the forced Indian removal by the U.S. making new lands available in the Deep South, there was much higher demands there for workers to cultivate land intensive sugarcane and cotton crops. All right. And then it goes on to talk about cotton gin. So at the same time, the invention of the cotton gin in the late 18th century transformed shape short staple cotton into a profitable crops that could be grown inland in the Deep South. Settler push into the South is expelling the five civilized tribe and other Native American groups. The cotton market had previously been dominated by the long staple cotton cultivated primarily on the Sea Islands and in coastal South Carolina low country, right? And it says the consequent boom in the cotton industry, coupled with the labor intensive nature of the crop, create a need for slave labor in the Deep South that could be satisfied by access supplies further north. All right, then right here we see that it talks about New Orleans. So it says the increased demand for labor in the Deep South pushed up the price of slaves in the market, such as New Orleans, which became the fourth largest city in the country, based in part on profits from the slave trade and related businesses. So the price differences between the upper and deep south created demand. Slave traders took advantage of this arbitrage opportunity by buying at lower price in the upper south and then selling slaves at a profit after taking or transporting them further south. Right. Okay, so I'm gonna skip some of this and then go down here. It talks about the breeding of slave children for sale. So it said gentlemen in Virginia and Maryland were quick to realize the value of young slaves and to organize breeding of them. This was not treated as any more shameful than the breeding of calves. Right. So it says it is early impossible that anything should exist more horrible than the American slave breeding. The history of it in this the Americans abolished the foreign slave trade earlier than England, but with this consolidation, no small comfort to so money loving a race as the slaveholders that by such abolition they enhanced the price of slaves then in America by stopping the competition in the home market of the supplies of newly imported slaves, while otherwise was not the home trade stopped as well as the foreign? The reply is obvious. So it goes on to say that to supply the home slave trade in an abominable, a most hideous, most criminal, and most revolting practice of breeding Negroes exclusively for sale has sprung up. And especially, we are told in Virginia, there are breeding plantations for producing Negroes as there are with us breeding farms for producing calves and lambs. As our calf and lamb breeders calculate the number of males to the flock of females, similar calculations are made by traffickers in human flesh. So it says, one instance was mentioned to me of a human breeding farm in America, which was supplied with 2 men and 12 women. Why should I pollute my page with a description of all that is immoral and infamous in such practices? But only think of the wench mother who nature prepares to love their children, children torn from them forever, just at the period that they could requite their mother's love. The witch mother, who I can depict the mother's distraction, her madness, but their maternal feelings, excuse me, yeah, the maternal feelings are, say, a modern writer treat with as much contemptuous indifference as those of the cows and ewes whose calves and lambs are sent to the English market. All right, so people, let's start. Let's talk about the whole breeding of slaves. Now, there's a book that's dealing with the whole concept about the breeding of the slaves and the mother is called The Pound of Flesh. Let me look up the title of the book because I mentioned it before. All right, so if you guys want to, you guys can look up this book right here. It is called, here it is. All right, so the name of the book is called The Price for Their Pound of Flesh. It called the value of the enslaved from womb to grave in the building of a nation by Dana Remy Berry. Okay. So you can get this book on Amazon. Okay. And the book is $17.99. That's how much the book costs. All right. So it goes into all of that. But yeah, with that being said, people argue that there was no slave farm or no breeding plantation, etc. Okay, some people argue that, and I had a person that came on the show at one point said that there was no breeding farm at one point, and you won't find any information on that. So that's still debatable. However, um, we cannot deny that people were not forced to have children. Okay, we can't deny the fact that the slave masters were not raping on the slave women to have more children so they can produce more slaves, or they were not getting one slave to have a relationship with another slave just so they can have a particular image of what they want the slave to look like. You know what I'm saying? So so again, there's been arguments about where there was no breeding farms, no breeding plantation. Okay, you can argue that, but you can't argue against the fact that there was not a case of people being raped or people being forced to have children with someone else from another plantation or from another location other than somebody that's in a family, or somebody they married to or something. So So it was a lot that was happening, and of course, we know that people, loved ones, was taken away from them, and they were sent off into a to another plantation, and they never got a chance to see their family again. Okay, they were sold away. So I mentioned a long time ago that in Atlanta, there's an area which is called Five Points, right? Where the model train station is at. Okay, over in that area, at one point in time, there used to be a slave auction. That area used to be a slave auction where they auction slaves off to other people or other places. Okay, so a lot of people don't know that. So yeah, if you look at their history in the downtown area, which is known as Five Points, right, which is known as the underground where the train station is at, that area was a slave auction. Well, you know what? I have to look into that to find out what exactly where that term came from. So if that term motherfucker came from that incident, then I would have to look into that. As a matter of fact, I can look into that right now before I continue on. Hmm. All right, so let's look at the term motherfucker. Let's look at the term where motherfucker came from, real quick. All right, so I know it's kind of off the subject, but somebody brought it up. So the term motherfucker, right? Sometimes abbreviated F as MOFO or MF or MFer is an English language vulgarism. It is a form of profanity fuck. While the word is usually considered highly offensive, it is rarely used in the literal sense of one who engaged in sexual activity with another person's mother or their own mother. Rather, it refers to a mean, despicable, or vicious person or any particularly difficult, frustrating situation. Alternatively, it can be used as a term of admiration, as in the term badass motherfucker, meaning a fearless and confident person. Right. So now let's see. According to this information, says the history and popular culture. The word dates back at least to the 19th century. In the 1889 Texas murder case, a witness testified that the victim had called the defendant a goddamn motherfucking bastardly son of a bitch shortly before his death. A later Texas court opinion from 1897 prints the word motherfucking in full. In 1917, a U.S. soldier called his draft board "you low down motherfuckers" in a letter. All right, so um, I really don't see the information about slavery. Okay, all right, but let's see. Okay, let's see. So how motherfucker got his mojo? All right, all right. So it says there's no evidence that the word was ever meant to be taken literally as a reference to incest. In the Lenny Bruce trial, a minister who heard Bruce's performance firsthand and was asked to initiate to the unsophisticated, might someone understand the word motherfucker as having to do with mothers and fucking? The minister said he didn't think it had anything to do with it. Newsweek drama critic Richard Gilman similarly testified that its comment parlance and does not mean that the individual is being accused of having had intercourse with his mother. So though some folk etymologies suggest that the term was based on the experience of the African American slave, there's no hard evidence for this either. According to this theory, the term was used to refer to white slave masters who raped your mother in order to break the black family down physically and psychologically. Also served as a means to avoid calling your slave master your father. So it says, however, according to Jesse Shalom, editor at large of the Oxford English Dictionary, author of the F word, any kind of folk etymological explanation of motherfucker or motherfucking is not true. And there's no evidence of the term from slavery time and nothing to suggest that it ever was used in reference to slave masters. While the first recorded instance of the word happens to be from an African American, Shitlows says there's evidence of its use even at early times from whites as well. All right, so again, it's not, I mean, that's the theory, but it's not enough information to validate that information to be true, that that's where the word motherfucker came from. So all we know is motherfuckers is just an expression. We can't really argue that, oh, it came from slavery. All right, so I just want to put that out there. All right, so anyways, let me go back to the source. Right. So if you want to check out more information, you can just go to Wikipedia. Right. If you want to look on the Wikipedia source about the domestic slave trade, you can go over here on this website. and you can read more into this and get into the information yourself. Okay. Now let's go to the next one. This one come from the Time magazine. So it talks about America interstate slave trade once trafficked nearly 30,000 people a year and reshaped the country's economy. Right. So let's go into what Time magazine website has to say about this. Well, here it is. Right. So it says America's interstate slave trade once trafficked nearly 30,000 people a year and reshaped the country's economy. Right. It says the brick townhouse on the north side of Duke Street was a handsome one, 3 stories tall with a gable roof, twin chimneys, and blinds on the windows painted a pretty shade of green. It fronted directly into the crude pavement near the western edge of Alexandria, Virginia, the 3/4 of a mile from the crowded wharves and bustling warehouses clustered along the Potomac River. Duke Street was a busy thoroughfare. The east, to the east, it ended at the river, and to the west, it became the Little River Turnpike, and recently completed toll road that connected Northern Virginia's grain and tobacco farms to the port of Alexandria, and by extension to the Atlantic economy. Okay. So it says in May of 1828, John Armfield signed a multi-year lease, then placed an ad in the Alexandria Phoenix Gazette. He had taken up residence in the house. He could be found there at all times, and he wanted to buy slaves, looking to purchase 150 likely young Negroes of both sexes between the age of 8 and 25. Armfield promised to pay higher prices in cash than any other purchaser that are in the market or that may hereafter come into market. He signed the ad with the name of the company he and Isaac Franklin had created a few months earlier, Franklin and Armfield. So it goes on to talk about the slave trade was almost never simply a matter of a slaveholder selling enslaved people to a slave trader who took them somewhere else, sold them to another slaveholder, and pocketed the difference between the purchase price and the sale price. Every transaction entailed the interest and involvement of a world of actors, and the world became more far reaching and elaborated as Armfield, Isaac Franklin, and Rice Ballard, another trader who would soon join the company, forged a partnership and build their business together. In the late 1820s and early 1830s, the embryonic national exchange in black bodies built by the first generation of professional traders grew sturdier and more intricate, and did the array of individuals, institutions, governments, and infrastructure that supported it. All right. So then it goes on. Then it goes on to say that travelers in the 1830s reported that the deteriorating agricultural production had made selling selling enslaved people that most reliable source of income for slaveholders in Chesapeake. When illustrators and engraver Abraham John Mason, for example, visited the United States from England, he observed that Virginia's principal traffic now consists in raising slaves for the more southern parts, becoming a complete slave nursery. It says prominent Virginians acknowledge it too. Thomas Jefferson Randolph, grandson and namesake of the third president, laminated that Virginia had become one grand menagerie where men are reared for the market line like oxen for the shambles. But others saw an upside. Congressmen Charles Fenton Mercier appreciated that Virginia derived an annual revenue of not less than $1.5 million from the exploitation of enslaved people, as did Thomas Dew, professor of political law at the College of William and Mary, who considered the slave trade an advantage to the state. It made sense for slaveholders to encourage breeding among the enslaved. Dew thought because Virginia is in fact a Negro raising state for other states. Hmm. So let's just think about that. Virginia is, in fact, a Negro raising state for other states. So basically, Virginia is like the foundation, according to that information, of is a foundation for the enslavement of African people, right? Is that primary foundation, basically. So because Virginia being that primary foundation, it's like other states looking to Virginia as that source, as a inspiration to be able to build up their own economy. All right. So again, as I mentioned earlier, Virginia, the Carolinas, right, and Maryland were the main states that was really they had a big slave economy more than any other states. Okay. So a lot of the slaves were brought to those areas more than they were brought to any other places. Okay. All right. Then, as we can see here, let's see what else they talking about. Cotton producing regions of the country still stood out most among those other states, and the demands for slave labor there received new stimuli in the late 1820s and the early 1830s. Most significant were the Indian removal policy of Andrew Jackson, who ascended to the presidency in 1829. Within a few years of taking office, Jackson engineered the mass explosion of Native Americans from the lower South, opening a new visa for American cotton production, which nearly increased 40% in the first half of the 1830s as the number of white fortune hunters soared. Slave traders came to them with stolen people to pack on to their stolen land. Hmm. Then it goes on to talk about once again Louisiana. And there's some interesting information about Louisiana regarding to the Creole I was looking into, and that's something I want to share before I close out. So I'm going to make sure I share that information as well. It says white people brought almost 30,000 slaves into Louisiana during the 1830s, nearly 80% more than they had in the 1820s. And cotton production in the state increased 63% between 1826 and 1834. Sugar production increased by 150% as well. This was strikingly fast growth, and yet Louisiana was only the third largest importer of slave labor in the 1830s. Bigger still was Alabama, and the twine uh, amplification of slavery and commodity crops in Louisiana and Alabama paled in comparison to their growth in Mississippi. In the early 1830s, federal deportation of the Chickasaw and Chickasaw people yielded 18 million acres of land there for white settlement, more than half the acreage of the entire state. Whites brought over 100,000 enslaved people into Mississippi during the 1830s, more than 5 times as many as they had in the previous decade, and the state's enslaved population grew almost 200%. The cotton crop produced by the enslaved in Mississippi multiplied more than fourfold over the course of just 8 years. All right. So then it goes on to talk about the massive influxes of capital and credit followed and famed the development of the cotton and slave trading frontiers. Slave experimented with chartering new kinds and larger numbers of banks. Investors from around the country and around the globe channel millions into land and stocks and bond ventures. So the second bank of the United States, using federal money taken in mostly from public sales of Indian land, deliver over a third of its loan to the merchants, bankers, and planters of the lower South. In Mississippi alone, the number of incorporated banks grew from 1 to 13 within a few years after 1829, and banking capital in the state increased tenfold. Everything at bottom was predicated on the labor and commodity value of enslaved people. Black bodies propelled the American economy towards the future. Isn't that ironic that they mention the banks, right? Because when we hear about the banks, we think of Wells Fargo's, Chase, and there's so many other. I think Bank of America was involved as well. So these main banks that we are banking with currently today, they made their profits off of the slave trade. So when people argue that, oh, blacks did not build America, or they were not the main foundation of America, well, technically our ancestors were. They did build America, and they built America with free labor. Involuntarily, they built America. They didn't volunteer to say, hey, I'm gonna come here to America and I'm gonna build this land up and I'm gonna give it to these people so they can be able to live and prosper and be able to develop their own businesses and grow their economy. No, that's not the intent. They were forced against their own will to come and build a land for somebody else to prosper off of. At the end of the day, slavery was about economy. That's what it was about. It was more so about economy than it was about political or social aspect. It was more based on economy because that's how the profit was. So, and I always say this, there will be no capitalism without slavery. Slavery was the reason why capitalism came into existence here in this country. Slavery created that avenue for capitalism. If it wasn't for slavery, there would be no reason for these people, for this land, to be able to operate under the capitalistic system. These oppressors, right, we had to find a way to make their own money, or to build another profit without slavery. They would have had a hard time getting this land. They would still been somewhere in the European country somewhere dealing with their own oppression, because they had to deal with oppression over there in the European countries, which is why many of them came over here, because they were dealing with religious oppression. And so they figure if they can come here, they can start all over again. So what I'm saying is the United States, as we know of today, was supposed to be the new Europe. All right. It was supposed to be the new Europe. So if you think about it, a lot of the stuff that you see here is a form of mockery of how the European countries operate. So when you see how Louisiana is, for example, right? Louisiana, like New Orleans, is the imitation of Orleans, which is in France. Okay. So you will see a lot of French influence in Louisiana. Even the way the people speak, they have like a French accent blended in, right? And then the Creole language they speak, that's nothing more than broken French. That's all it is. All right, so you will hear a lot of French influence, and also you'll hear some Spanish influence as well, because technically speaking, it was the Spanish people that came here to this place, what we call the New World, prior to anybody else. All right, before the British came, before the French people came, it was the Spanish folks, because they was one of the first to go grab slaves up out of the continent of Africa and bring them into these different places, right? Bring them into the Atlantic. And same with the Portuguese. They was one of the first to do that too. But the Portuguese didn't really have land here in this place. They had more land in South America. But the Spanish people, they had land here in America and in South America as well. And also in the Latin region. Okay. So You have to study the history about South Carolina or the Carolinas, right? Study the history about Florida. Study the history about Louisiana before it was taken over by the French and taken over by the British. Okay, so again, yeah, it was just basically a lot of the influences that we encounter here in America, right? It was supposed to be like the new Europe. So America was supposed to be the new Europe, the new foundation, a new start for these Europeans, right? But in the South, slavery built up the economy so much. So the South was not ready to let go of that. They weren't ready to turn it over and get involved into the Industrial Revolution. So because the South was much different from the North, right? And at this time, they was not even united. Okay, there was no United States. That was just the North and the South. So the South was the Confederate States of America, and the North was the United States. All right. So the North already found their way of how to make their profit away from slavery. It's just the South wanted to continue to have their slave economy, which is why they was having slave trades amongst themselves, amongst the upper South and the deep part of the South. All right. And you can look at this on Time magazine. All right. So you can go on time.com and you can find this information. And they got the source from this book right here called The Ledger and Chain: How Domestic Slave Traders Shaped America. So that's where the excerpt come from. All right. Which I'm going to present that information. Oh, hold on. Yeah, so right down here, this is where the excerpt come from. The Ledger and the Chain: How Domestic Slave Traders Shaped America. So you guys can look that book up. Now let's go ahead and let's get into some more information. All right, so there's some old books like this one right here. I'm about to show you guys real quick. All right, so this book right here is called Slavery and the Domestic Slave Trade is the United States. Oh, excuse me, Slavery and the Domestic Slave Trade in the United States. My bad. This deals with a series of letters addressed to the Executive Committee of the American Union. Was written by Professor E.A. Andrews. Okay, and this book came out in 1836. So it was going into the concept about the slave trade. All right. So here's the letter. It says the New Haven, the letter to New York, journey to Baltimore. All right, so I'm not gonna go through all of this, but if you guys want to read this, you guys can go on Google and you can download it for free. This book is again, this book was written in 1836, so you can download this book for free on Google. All right, so make sure y'all take notes on that. And I know y'all thinking that, well, damn, that's a lot of damn information. Well, that's how it is. When you looking up stuff, you gonna come across a lot of information. So it's not like something that's just a quick fix. Like that's what it takes to actually do. If you're gonna actually do research, you're gonna have to dig into more and more information. That's just how it is. All right, and so then here's another book right here, right? And you can download this on Google as well. This one is called Domestic Slave Trade of the Southern States by Winfield H. Collins. And this book came out in 1904. All right, you can download this book for free on Google. Okay, you can download this book for free. and you can read it at your own time. So it goes into 7 chapters. So it talk about the sketch of the rise of the trade in African slaves, of the foreign slave trade of the southern states, right? So, and then the last chapter talks about the laws of the southern states with reference to importation and exportation of slaves. Okay, so you guys can check this book out. You can download it on Google, right? You can read it for free. And it's called Domestic Slave Trade of the Southern States. All right. Now, now the book that I was telling you guys about, if I can repost it up. All right, so this book right here is called The Ledger and the Chain. All right, so The Ledger and the Chain: How Domestic Slave Traders Shaped America. And it was written by Joshua D. Ropeman. Okay. You can find this book on Amazon. So it goes into the introduction. One is dealing with the origins, two deal with the choices, associate, currency, dissolution, reputation, legacy, and the epilogue deals with the ledger and the chain. Right. So it goes into the origin about the slave trade, whatnot. So let's look at the intro real quick. All right, so right down here, it says in 1808, Congress exercised its constitutional prerogative to end the legal importation of enslaved people from outside the United States, but it did not end domestic slave trading, effectively creating a federally protected internal market for human beings. Already growing by the early 19th century, interior commerce in the enslaved was part of a massive forced migration underpinning slavery expansion in the 6 decades before the Civil War. So between 1800 and 1860, American slaveholders sent roughly 1 million black people from the upper South to the lower South, moving in the span of 60 years over twice as many people as were transported in 2 centuries to mainland North America via the transatlantic slave trade from Africa. They were responsible for the movement of millions more within individual states. By the time they were through, the number of enslaved people in the United States had more than quadrupled. The number of slave states below the Mason-Dixie line had nearly doubled, and slavery had crossed the Mississippi River and the Rio Grande. And then goes on to say the extension of slavery seen across the Atlantic world in the 19th century both furthered and was nurtured by the technological, economic, political, and ideological changes that usher into in the modern age. Central to the process in the United States were the appearance of the cotton gin and the steel power sugar mill, the introduction of steamboats and railroads, the dispossession and explosion of southeastern Indian nation, the rise of an imperialist and racist white male democracy, and the evolution of an interconnected system of the national markets. So as these developments converge with the maturation of transatlantic industrial textile production in the global credit system, demand for the enslaved, particularly in cotton and sugar plantation districts of the lower South, escalated dramatically. So did their market value. By the 1860, 4 million enslaved people in the United States were a pillar of American prosperity, cumulatively worth more than the whole country had invested in manufacturing, railroads, and banks put together. Now you know what that number add up to, right? If so, let's go back to it. If if by 1860 4 million enslaved people, right, in the United States were a pillar of American prosperity, and they were worth more than the whole country had invested in, as far as manufacturing, railroad, and banks put together, then that means that altogether, that means altogether that we were, or our ancestors were worth trillions of dollars in this country as far as their labor is concerned. They were worth trillions of dollars because all the other stuff, right? The manufacturing, the railroads, um and the banks, they will be somewhere around like the multi-millions and the billions. So that means that our ancestors, as far as their labor is concerned and how much they put into work and how much it costs to bring them here, they'll be worth trillions of dollars. Think about that. Think about that. Think about that. Isn't that something? And now you wonder why so many people put up fight for so many years about reparation, right? Because when we add the number up and we see in this book right here, let's go back. Let's go back and look at the book right here, right? As we can see right here in this book, according to the preview, that American prosperity, 4 million enslaved African people, was worth more than the whole country had invested in. As far as the railroad and banks, that should tell you that it was somewhere up in the trillions. As if you count it in modern time period, right? But anyways, I mean, it's just something interesting. It's just something that you just think about. So our livelihood meant more, and then for people to downplay and think that we should not be entitled to anything in this country, then that becomes a problem right there. You know what I'm saying? That really becomes a problem when people tell you that you're not entitled to anything, or because you wasn't there during that time period, or it wasn't you being enslaved. No, but you came from an ancestry of those who were enslaved in this country, and they have not received anything they was promised. So, but let's go ahead. Book name is Slave Trade of the United States. Yes, I did. Yeah, I just posted a book up about the slave trade of the United States. Hold on. All right, so yeah, the one that I posted up was the domestic slave trade of the United States. Now, this was an old book that was written in 1904. Okay. Um, Let me see. Yeah. So yeah, that book that I posted up. Yeah. So yeah, that book that I posted up. Two of them both deals with the domestic slave trade. Yes, the ledger and the chains. Yes. Mm-hmm. So that's where I'm reading from. Basically, the ledger and the chain, how domestic slave traders shaped America. Yeah, so that's where I was. Yeah, that's where I was reading from that little information, that little piece. So I was reading the preview from that book. So if anybody wanna purchase that book, I recommend you guys do so because it really goes into that information about the slave trade. What I was looking into was the introduction. Okay. So if you guys want to actually read it for yourself, you can. If you want to get it on Amazon, you can as well. And also, I would recommend y'all try abebook.com. Let me post up their website. abebooks.com. Yeah, you guys should try that. You guys should try that website as well. Just look that up. And you can also find books on there for a reasonable price, as well as a little bit cheaper than Amazon. But you can find all type of books on there, especially about domestic slave trade. If you just type it in. All right, peace, Yaya. How you doing? Let's see what you talking about. Another must read: German's Black Holocaust. Okay. So yeah, when I get to that subject, I will put that out there about the German Black Holocaust. Yeah, I will look into that and then find out more information on it so I can be able to share it with the people. But I thank you for putting that out there. Yep, Yep. That's why I tell people all the time reparation is not a handout. No, it's not a handout. No, it's not a handout. It's more to reparation. See, what people don't understand, reparation is not just dealing with monetary sources, but it's also just dealing with resources that is available for those in the African descendant community. Okay, that's what it's really about. It's not about just being able to give people trillions of dollars or millions of dollars or whatever just so they can spend. No, but being able to make sure they have uh have their own resource and have their own infrastructure. If everybody else can have an infrastructure, so can the African American community. So it's that's why it's important that reparation come into the conversation. And reparation been talked about for a long period of time, way before the ADOS, way before the FBA even got a hold to it. The conversation about reparation came about a long time ago. As a matter of fact, the HR 40 bill came into existence around 1989 due to the Republic of New Africa, all right, and they was working with the late John Conyers, right, who happened to be the senator at that time period. So Sheila Jackson, she took over once he had passed away, but once the bill came out in 1989, it's been on the it's been on the stand for a long time. So they have a conference every year discussing about the bill and trying to get the reparation started. So this ain't nothing new. All right. So reparation ain't nothing new. It's been going on for the longest. It's been a discussion for the longest. It's just up. But the thing is, it's gonna take more than just the United States to give us reparation. And that's what people also got to recognize. Is not see slavery was not just a United States business. It was an international business. So that means that every party that was involved would have to pay up on reparation. All right. Including Africa, because Africa was involved as well. You know what I'm saying? But the good thing about African countries, right? They allow African Americans to repatriate into those countries to gain citizenship, etc. But all the other places like Europe, like like France and all of that, I mean, yeah, they gonna let you come, but as far as like giving you reparation, that's a major fight because they made the most profit off of our ancestors. You know what I'm saying? They made the most profit. Now, the United States, Britain especially, France, Switzerland, Portuguese, I mean, the Portugal country, um, Spain, all of those places, the Netherlands, they made the most profit. They made the most profit off of the back of our people. So all the parties gonna have to be involved. That's something that would be had to be taken to the United Nations. It would have to be taken to the United Nations. It would have to be taken to the World Court as opposed just to the United States courts because it's like the United States can't really do much about it alone. You know what I'm saying? So you just can't deal with the United States alone. You have to really bring it internationally. I mean, everybody. So even the blacks in the Caribbeans, even the blacks in the Latin countries, right? They gonna have to get involved and making sure that these countries, the European countries that were involved in the slave trade, also pay up. So people gotta understand it's bigger than just the United States. You have to go to everybody, all the parties that was involved in this whole thing. Okay. And so it makes me question about Biden, how Biden can talk about he's sending $55 billion or something like that to African nations, right? But is it really genuine with the money that he's sending over there to the African nation, or is it a way to bring about control of their resources over there because of the fact that they have a lot of natural resources and a lot of materials? What was the whole agenda here? So that's what people have to really question the true intentions of Biden as far as what he's really trying to do. And how can you forget about those here in the United States? But anyways, yep. But anyways, I wanted to show you guys. hmm, I want to show you guys another book. So this book right here is called The American Negro Slavery, right? And this book came about in 19, well, it was copyrighted in 1918, all right? But it was recopied in 1994 at the latest. Trying to find out who the name of the author is. So it was written by D. Appleton and Company. Okay. So Louisiana paperback edition. Okay. So the name of the author is Ulrich Bonnell Phillips. That's the name of the author of this book. So this one's called The Mr. Slave Trade. All right, so in the New England town of Plymouth in November of 1729, certain Thomason Phillip, who was about to sail for Jamaica, exchanged a half interest in his one-legged Negro man for a similar share in Isaac Lathrop, Negro boy who was to sail with Phillips and be sold on the voyage. Right. So it goes on to say Lathrop was meanwhile to teach the man the trade of cord winding and was to resell his share to Phillips at the end of a year at a price of £40 sterling. This transaction, which was duly concluded in the following year, suggests the existence of a trade in slaves on a small scale from north to south in colonial times. Another item in the same connection is an advertisement in the Boston Gazette of August 17, 1761, offering a offering for sale young slaves just from Africa and posting to proposing to take in exchange any Negro men, strong and hardly, though not of the best moral character, which are proper subjects of transportation. And a third instant appeared in a letter of James Harbershine of Georgia in 1764, telling of his purchase of a Marcel of Negroes at New York for work on his rice plantation. that the disestablishment of slavery in the North during and after the American Revolution in chains, the exploitation of Negroes was recited in a Vermont statute of 1787 and is shown by occasional items in Southern archives. So it says, one of these is the registry at Savannah of a bill of sale made at New England in 1787 for a mulatto boy as a servant for the term of 10 years only, at the expiration of which time he is to be free. Right. So this chapter right here deals with the domestic slave trade. It's coming from this book, which is titled The Negro Slavery, the American Negro Slavery. So if you guys want to look into this book, you can come on here to archive.org and you can just check it out. It's basically an online library. That's all it is. You can just go ahead and check out the book online. And as a matter of fact, I can type it in the session for y'all. So let's look it up. Archives. Yeah, archive.org. So you guys can go ahead and check out stuff online for free if y'all want to look into that, etc. Now, so Whitney Plantation is another website that I won't really go too much into, but yeah, basically, Whitney Plantation is located in Louisiana, right? So it talks about the domestic slave trade in Louisiana area, right? All right, so right down here, it's interesting. It said the internal slave trade became a lucrative business between the 1820s and 1860s. This was a time when identification like Negre American or Negres American became frequent on the German coast slave inventories to designate those who came from the east coast of the United States. Some of them were identified according to the state or city of origin. Instance, Negre de Virginia or Negre de Baltimore. From 1821 to 1841, the Franklin and Armfield Company became the most famous among the internal slave trading companies. This company was created in 1818 by Isaac Franklin, a native of Tennessee, and his nephew John Armfield, who was a resident of Alexandria near Washington, D.C. From there, he sent cargoes of slaves to Franklin, who sold them in New Orleans and upstream towards the Red River and Natchez, Mississippi. Slave stealing also became a major business involving networks in the North, where even free people of color were kidnapped and sold down south. The most famous case was Solomon Northward, kidnapped in March of 1841 in Washington D.C. and was taken to New Orleans, where he was sold to a planter from the Red River. He was freed in 1853 after 12 long years in bondage. The internal slave trade was mostly sustained by the natural growth of the slave population. Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee, Missouri, and the District of Columbia were the slave exploiting area. Of all these states, Virginia was the biggest supplier. Slaves were also smuggled directly from Africa or from the Caribbean islands, mainly Cuba. In the southern United States, the natural environment was more than favorable to smugglers, especially in Louisiana with its lush wilderness, swamps, and bayous. The island of Baratara was the main way by which smugglers of various nationality included introduced slaves into Louisiana. Among the pirates of Baratara, the celebrated Lafayette brothers, Jean and Pierre, were primarily the most successful. Interesting. All right. So now I wanted to share one last information and then I'm gonna call it a quits. This one's about the Creole. I think, was it Creole slave revolt? Let me. Okay, this one's called the Creole case. That's what it was called. So this information here was dealing with the Creole case that took place in I think in Louisiana area, right? Well, actually, it was in the Bahamas area. But let me go ahead and get into it because this kind of goes into the subject. So, Creole case. So, the Creole case was a slave revolt aboard the American slave ship Creole in November 1841 when the bridge was seized by the 128 slaves who were aboard the ship when it reached Nassau in the British colony of the Bahamas, where slavery was abolished. The British was transporting enslaved people as part of the coastwise slave trade in the American South. It has been described as the most successful slave revolt in U.S. history. Two died in the revolt, an enslaved person and a member of the crew. So the United Kingdom had abolished the slave trade with the Slave Trade Act in 1807 and the practice of slavery throughout the British Empire in 1833. Accordingly, British officials in the Bahamas ruled that the enslaved people on Creole were free after their arrival in Nassau if they chose to stay. 19 men who were identified as being responsible for the slave revolt were imprisoned on charges of mutiny and a Admiralty Court hearing on April 1842 ruled that the men had been illegally held captive as slaves and had the right to use force to gain freedom. The 17 men, two of the prisoners had died, and the intern were released and given their freedom. So it says when the Creole reached New Orleans in December 1841 with three enslaved women and two enslaved children aboard who had refused to leave the ship, Southerners were outraged about the loss of property caused for compensation ensued. Relations between the United States and Britain were strained for a time. The incident occurred during negotiation for the Weber Ashburton Treaty of 1842, but was not directly addressed. The parties settled on the seven crimes qualifying the extradition in the treaty, but they did not include slave revolts. Eventually, claims for losses of slaves from Creole and two other American ships transporting enslaved persons were repaid to their owners, along with other claims dating to 1814 and in a treaty of 1853 between the United States and Britain, for which an arbitration commission awarded settlement in 1855 against each nation. All right, so basically, the Creole case was dealing with the slave revolt that was happening on a slave ship called Creole. All right, that took place in 1841. All right, so basically, the slaves was revolting because they were transported, right? Yeah, they were transported to the American South, and they were going to Louisiana, New Orleans. Okay. All right, so I just want to kind of put that information out there. So if you guys want to really read into more about it, you can on your own terms. Just look up about the Creole case. Ooh, Lord have mercy. Yeah, just look up the Creole case and you can read more about it. So that was that situation, the slave revolt. So I'm gonna get more into it some other time, but I just wanted to give you guys an idea, get you guys familiarized with it. But just look it up on your own term. All right, so that's it. So that's pretty much it. I appreciate everybody that tuned in, watched this video. If you like the video, go ahead and like it, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, share the channel. And I hope you guys were able to jot down the information, the title of the books that I had posted on here, so you guys can look up more information about the domestic slave trade. And until next time, y'all take it easy on yourselves. Please be safe. Peace and power and elevation be to all of you. And shout out to everybody in the chat that participated. And I will talk to you guys later. We'll reconnect. All right. Peace.